Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the first of our Spring Speaker Series for 2024. My name is Ann Bennett. I am the Executive Director of the Laurel Historical Society, and I'm also joined by Abby Carver from the Laurel Historical Society as well. So we will be moderating this panel presentation tonight, and I just wanted to welcome everyone tonight or whenever you're watching our webinar. We are very excited and honored to be here tonight for our panel presentation, both in celebration of Black History Month, as well as in support of our upcoming temporary exhibit, Visions and Voices, the African American Voting Experience in Laurel from 1920 to 2023. We are reopening the museum next Friday, February 16th, and that exhibit will be on display with our current exhibit, It's All Laurel, during our open hours, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from 12 to 4 p.m. And Visions and Voices will run through June 16th. And I want to thank my panelists first and foremost, not only for their time tonight, but for taking the time to participate and respond to our questionnaires, which we use to develop the temporary exhibits. And our goal in bringing that exhibit to Laurel was to capture as much information and stories and materials as we could on the African American voting experience in Laurel. And we wanted to bookmark the exhibit by featuring materials from the most recent election in November of 2023, and then look into our archives about 100 years in the past to really bookend and see what stories and what progression and what progress has been made, and what steps we still need to take as a community. I want to quickly thank our museum's exhibit committee before we begin. Karen, Marlene, Charlie, Lynn, Rebecca, Michelle, Abby, Cindy, and Jackie. In addition, we received tremendous help from the City of Laurel, particularly Sarah Green and Rick Wilson in producing the data and statistics that we needed for our research. And we also received questionnaires back from Kyla Clark, Christine Johnson, Martin Mitchell, Brenta Smith, and we thank them all, in addition to our panelists tonight, I should say, for filling out those questions for us. So the questions that we will go through tonight were taken from those questionnaires, and we do have a lot to cover in a short amount of time. We'll be talking for just about an hour here. So we'll be doing some pretty strict timekeeping and trying to keep everyone on topic as much as possible. So we do encourage questions and comments from the audience, both through the chat and the Q&A. But I do just want to remind you that this is not a political discussion or a political forum. It's really to celebrate and honor the historic milestones of all of our panelists tonight and hear from them personally in their own words, their experiences in and around Laurel. So without further delay, I have the honor and pleasure of introducing former council member, Mr. Frederick Smalls, former council member, Mrs. Valerie Nicholas, and our current mayor, the Honorable Keith Sydnor. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And I want to begin with a little biographical background for our speakers before they tell us about their historic milestones and contributions to Laurel in their own words. So some of you might not realize that all three of our panelists tonight are not from Laurel. They're close by. Some were born outside of Laurel, some in our bordering state of Virginia. But I want to invite our panelists to talk a little bit about their biographical information and just let our audience know a little bit about you. But more importantly, what attracted you to move to Laurel? So why did you come here and why are you still here? So Mr. Smalls, we'll start, I guess, in order of election. So if you don't mind, just tell us a little bit about your biographical background and why you're here in Laurel with us.
Thank you. And correct, I didn't grow up in Laurel. I grew up in DC. I lived in DC for a number of years. That's where my formal education took place. I moved to Laurel once I got married. My wife grew up in Beltsville. That was my motivation to follow my wife to this area. We decided that despite my early protests, I wanted to raise our kids in Laurel, I'm sorry, in DC, but she overruled, as wives typically do. And we settled in Laurel, I'm happy to say, and now we've had the pleasure of raising our daughters and our grandkids here in the city. So I've been very pleased with that, and the work that I have done over the years in the city have all been to give them, to help contribute to giving them a healthy environment to live in.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Ms. Nicholas, you're not from too far away, but what brought you to the area and why are you sticking around?
I actually moved to Washington, D.C. in 1986. And I moved here to accept a position in the federal government. That was the start of my federal career of 20 years in the federal government. And then in 2000, one of my closest and dearest friends moved to Laurel. And she talked about the activities, she talked about the parks, and she just talked about how beautiful the city was. And she said it reminded her of home. She was from North Carolina. And that is what first initially inspired me to move here. So I've been here ever since. I've been here in this area ever since.
That's great. I think that's a common reason why people are still in the area. Mr.
Mhm.
Mayor, what about you?
Yeah, I'm originally from Petersburg, Virginia. My background is military. Had the opportunity to spend 24 years in the United States Navy, 12 years active duty, and 12 years in the reserves. I spent a career in federal law enforcement. I retired in 2019 from federal pretrial services. I moved to Laurel in 2003 because I got the job, federal government job here, and one of my closest friends back home was living here in Laurel, Stewart Manor. So I stayed with him a couple of days till I found me an apartment beside where I wanted to live, and I said, "Well, this is." Well, I really impressed all the restaurants. I was a single man at the time. I was like, wow, I got to cook. All these restaurants are Route 1. So, and it's close to Greenbelt, get on the train. So that's what made me move to Laurel, because of the restaurants. And so,
If I could just add to that, for
Mhm.
me, everything is here. I mean, you've got the train station that'll take you to DC, it'll take you to Baltimore. There are beautiful restaurants, of all different types of various foods. And it's just a lot of fun. There seem to be a lot of activities and things that would happen on the weekend, So that's one of the things that keeps me here too.
Mhm. Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And that's, very common experience for a lot of our residents now moving into the area and being somewhat, transitory from going to DC or Baltimore and then moving on. But there's a lot of people that stick around just for those very, very same reasons that everyone mentioned. So the second question, we want to dive a little deeper into your public service. So I wanted to get an idea of how you first approach getting involved with public service for if your candidacy in Laurel City Council was your first foray into politics, or if you got started in other places, and talk to us about your reasons why. How did you first get interested? What was your inspiration? Were you inspired by family, friends, colleagues, by what was happening in the nation or the state at the time? So just talk a little bit about your motivations for how you ended up in public service to Laurel. So Ms. Nicholas, we're going to start with you for that question, please.
Okay. I was in the federal government for 20 years. I have had the opportunity to work as a White House appointee, serving a presidential appointee. I've always been interested in politics. And when I was elected to the Laurel City Council, I said that there's certainly a different view when you're up front than being behind the scenes. But I've always been interested in politics. Serving on the Laurel City Council was my first elected official position in my own, the only one I've held.
Mhm. Tell us more about that. Was it somebody suggested that you take over the position? How did you get appointed to fill out your term and then start running after that?
Well, that's a great question, because at the time when I ran, when I saw the position, it was in the Laurel City, it was in the Laurel Leader. And my brother had just passed away. My oldest brother passed away from kidney failure, and I was his caregiver for a long time. And when I saw it, I said, wow, I said, maybe that's something I should run for. And I went back and forth with the idea. I thought about it and looked at the paper again and said, I wasn't. And I said, let me just try it. And when I submitted my package to the Laurel City Council, I was selected.
That's wonderful. And just to further up, follow up on that, I guess what kept you running for re-election? Why did you wanted to serve more terms?
Well, I've always been involved in the community, even before I was an elected official. I've always been a community advocate for people in need, particularly the homeless, for domestic violence victims, because I'm a survivor of domestic violence myself, and my baby was killed in 1995. And that's what started my community work in helping people. And when I got on the council, I said it was such an honor to serve. And I wanted to continue to serve and help people as much as I could.
That's
If
wonderful.
if I could jump in for just a second too.
Mhm.
One thing, Ms. Nicholas, that I find really interesting and inspiring about you personally and doing research for our exhibit is if you go back in Laurel Leader archives, you see the same answer from you every time that you're running for election and talking about why it's important to you for you to run and to serve. And you talk every time you were interviewed about how you want to help people and serve the community. And it's just such a consistent, truly passionate answer that you've given every time. And I thought that was really interesting to see kind of the same thing throughout the years. And
Thank
I
you.
just kind of wanted to mention that because you echoed it again here today, which
You know,
really
just
speaks to your commitment.
thank you so much. My personal mission, and it's on my website, but it's always been my personal mission from when I can remember. I think since when I turned 20, was to leave people better than I found them. That's actually on my website is my mission statement, but that's always been my mission as a much younger person until now. And I still, even though I'm not in public office, I still do a great deal of service, and I still help a great deal of people here in this community and abroad. But that's just it's my calling. It's not a job for me. It is my calling.
That's great. Abby, thank you for mentioning that because that is, very important, to serve Laurel in different capacities for sure. Mr. Mayor, we're gonna throw the question over to you. We all know that you were on City Council before your historic election this past November. So if you can speak maybe to why, you transitioned, to run to mayor from City Council, and then also was this your first, interest in politics, or was that something that you acquired through your military and your federal career?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Politics has always been an interest of mine, even in school, like social studies, history, always been my favorite subject. I know how the voting is very important as well. Like, things can't change unless you have access to voting. And so when I was in the Navy, I was stationed overseas on the ship, and I was a voter registration coordinator. But that means I helped people get absentee ballots. So people that wanted to vote, we filled out a little form to get absentee ballots to vote in. Then I always been an activist, a community organizer, standing up for the community, organize people to vote. So in 2015, I started here in Prince George County, of course, and I was running around to all the barbershops in Prince George County, registering convicted felons to vote, because Maryland changed the law, and a lot of convicted felons thought they cannot vote. So that was my mission, to go around to all the barbershops in Prince George County and register people to vote, tell them about the election coming up, things of that nature. And so all my work was in D.C., doing a lot of grassroots organization groups in D.C., helping the underserved community. And I started getting involved here in Laurel, and then following the sites in Laurel, and then an article, email, say, hey, the election coming up. So I looked at all the things I've done in my life. I said, I qualify for this now. Went out, started hitting the ground, and 6 years later, here I am, the mayor of the city. Being the mayor wasn't a goal of mine, to be honest with you. I was just going to be a city councilor and just continue to work there. As I got more experience to start, saying, okay, I can do this. And the mayor most days is going to retire. So I was like, hey, you know what? Seat's going to be open, so why not me? And as you can see, I ran, and it was a contested race. So I'm glad everybody ran as well. But, here we are now today. So helping people for my whole life, like you said, like Councilman Nicholas said, organizing and volunteer in different organizations, coaching youth football, mentoring, through the Big Brothers Big Sisters program. Any way I can give back to make my community better, whether I live in Brooklyn, New York, or Richmond, Virginia, or right here in Laurel, Maryland, I've always been giving back to my community. I'm going to continue to do that, whether I'm elected official or not, because it takes all of us to make our society better.
Mhm.
I love that. Thank you. The idea of, service in different capacities and, finding your passion in different ways as well, having an interest in politics, from very early on. So, Mr. Smalls, was that the case for you as well? Were you always interested in politics, or was there a different set of inspiration for you to join public service?
A totally different set of inspirations for me. Politics was really nothing I had any ambition for. However, I always had an interest in being involved and engaged in my community. So I became president of my homeowners association here in Bellamy. I served in that capacity for a number of years. And in that role, the former president, late Mayor Frank Casula, would hold quarterly homeowner association meetings where department heads would come out and talk about city services. And that kind of started my interest in the city and in the services. I was also during that time engaged with an organization called Stand for Children. And we engaged Mayor Casula and others in the city to do things for youth, which ended up starting the teen club that Parks and Recs had going for a number of years, which was one of the things we asked for. My good friend, the late Councilwoman Janice Robinson, she and I were very engaged and instrumental in that. Because of that, Mayor Casula appointed me to the Board of Appeals, where I now serve as chair. So things kind of came full circle with that. During that time, as I served on the Board of Appeals, Mayor Casula encouraged me then to run for a city council. And most of the time when he brought that up, my answer was a flat out no. He asked Bob DiPietro to also kind of twist my arm, so to speak, and encourage me to get involved. And finally, I relented, and I did. And I have had the honor and pleasure of serving for 17 years as the member of the City Council in Laurel, being the second African-American to successfully run and win as a councilman. And now I have the honor of being the longest serving African-American council from 2002 to 2019. And I have the citizens of the city to thank for that, having run 8 successful elections. I was very, very honored. I'm very pleased with the service I was able to provide to the city. That led to a number of other opportunities for me, serving as chairman of the board at Laurel Regional Hospital, currently serving as chairman of the University of Maryland Medical Systems Citizen Advisory Council. So from City Council and that engagement, I managed to have other opportunities to serve the Laurel community and the greater Laurel community.
Well, thank you for that. Excellent. And thank you for, going into some of your, historic milestones and accomplishments as well. Before we kind of go into each of our panelists' milestones and contributions in a little more depth, I kind of wanted just to, talk at this point. We talked about, your personal inspiration for running for office in Laurel, but also what were maybe any hesitations or any other inspirations with running as an African American candidate. Were there any considerations that you had because there haven't been that many candidates, or there haven't been any that many elected in Laurel's history. Mr. Smalls, you had mentioned Mr. Reggie Parks. He was the first African American elected to Laurel City Council, but that wasn't until 1992, which is right around the same time that Prince George's County elected their first African American city or county council mayor, excuse me. So I kind of just wanted to hear a little more, from maybe a little more personal experience in terms of, serving in that capacity while also having a lived experience that wasn't like a lot of the other candidates that were on the ballots. Mr. Smalls, do you mind taking that question in line with what you just said?
I grew up in the 60s. So I had visions from nightly news of the kind of racial turmoil that was going on in the country at that time, but not only turmoil, but there was a great deal of racial pride that I grew up with. And so when I did finally decide to run for city council, I was determined that I was going to, in my own way, help to draw attention to some of the issues and concerns of our of our diverse city residents. And I'll give a prime example. There was a project that was under consideration by the Planning Commission and the City Council several years ago to build what is currently the large buildings at 2nd Street, I believe it is. On that site, there used to be a Negro baseball field. Laurel had a Negro baseball league. And that history of that site was destined to be lost. And I reached out to the mayor, I reached out to a number of other people to make sure that that was preserved, or areas were preserved, that was recognition that was given, so that historically it would be recognized for what it was. We all know the Grove of Laurel as being an area where many African Americans lived, site of Emancipation Day celebrations historically, etc. But I wanted to make sure then, and some of our residents were members of the Laurel Negro League baseball team. So honor and recognition was one of the things that I wanted to make sure that was not overlooked by the contributions of the minority population in the city.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, and especially because that's our perspective is to try to document and share all stories of Laurel and to tell a complete story and history. And it's exciting to know that locally it's been documented and shared and preserved, and that even now we're taking it a step further and going and partnering with the county. So there are stops in Laurel now on the Prince George's County Civil Rights Trail. So there's one at St. Mark's, close to the fields that you had mentioned, and then one right across the street from the museum at the municipal pool. So it's important, again, to understand that history and to preserve it and know the streets, the buildings, the people that you might pass every day are part of that deep legacy. So thank you for that. Mr. Mayor, I'll turn the question over to you in terms of you're now, serving on probably what is the most, diverse city council that has served Laurel. So what is it like, for you personally to be mayor on such, I guess a diverse and exciting and young slate of council members as well? Oh, and sorry, Mr. Mayor, I think you're still muted.
I was so ready to talk. Thank you for the question again. When I got elected, I'll talk about the milestones first. When I got elected in 2017, we became the first majority African-American council in Laurel history. Councilman Small was already on the council, and Councilman Nichols already on the council, and I came on 17. So I made 3 African-Americans serve on the council at the same time. And another milestone was Councilman Nichols was nominated the council president, and that's the first time African-American female had been the council president as well. And another milestone on this past election, of course, myself becoming the first African-American male become the mayor of the city, but we had 2 times, first time we got 2 African-American females serving on the Laurel City Council at the same time with Councilman Clark and Councilman Johnson. So those are some great milestones. Anytime that you can stand in front of young people and be any type of elected official, any type of person doing something positive is very inspirational, because so often that our young folks lose hope and they don't see us doing a lot of positive things. And so that's one of the reasons why I mentor, for folks can see Black people and Black men and Black women in a positive position. So I take pride in that, but I'm just a human being. I want to serve all people, but we know the history of our country and how things was been. But it do take a great pride to stand in front of young people. They can see that, hey, I can do this. So, and people paved the way for me. We didn't get here by ourselves. So a lot of people made some sacrifices so we can be in this position today. And I just got to pay it forward. So, I'm very humble. We are a very diverse city. I like this city, and I'm gonna do my best for the city. So I'm just enjoying my time here, and enjoying working for the people because they voted for me. I serve the people well. So yeah, I'll leave it right there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's really important to serve with passion and pride, and to to work for the people that elected you to the historic office. So Ms. Nicholas, Mr. Mayor stole some of your milestones for you, but yeah, I wanted to know, I guess, a little bit from your perspective, not only running as an African American, but also as a woman, because again, historically, there have not been as many female candidates. There's only been 1 female mayor of Laurel as well, and so now, as Mr. Sydnor said, now we have 2 African American females serving at the same time on the council, which is exciting. So if you could talk a little bit more about your experience serving with your own term, but then also what you might have experienced when you heard the news about kind of paving the way for the 2 councilwomen serving Laurel right now.
Okay. Well, I first want to say thank you, Fred, because Fred gave me a lot of advice when I was on the council. He served as a mentor, so to speak. So I want to say thank you, Fred. And then I want to say thank you, Keith, because Keith nominated me to be council president. And that paved the way for me to have another milestone. I will say, when I first ran the first time, I ran for the seat that was vacated by Gail Snyder. So it was a temporary appointment. So when I had to run for the seat, I ran afraid, because I had both people that are of the African American race and Caucasians that would say, I don't know if you're going to win, Val. They've never had a Black woman in office. And I said, well, I'm going to run afraid. I have to say my faith in Jesus Christ is strong. And I relied on my faith all through all the 5 terms that I served. I also want to say that I knew that I would make history, and I knew that I had to, continue to, do the right thing and serve the people and always be very visible. One of the things that really was very touching for me is several of the terms that I ran, when I ran, I was told that I got the most votes in the city. I think it was 3 out of the 5 terms. And I would have people come up to me and say, this is my daughter, or this is my son's first time voting. And when I was on, standing at my little campaign site, and when people would come up to me, I would break down and cry. I'd have to go to my car because I was so emotional. I'm very thankful and humble, because I know, for me, I'm a Christian person and I can't do anything without Jesus Christ. And I know that He made a way for me to serve the people of the city. And I'm very thankful for that. The other milestone that I'm thankful for is the grant programs that they bought on Main Street, because it gave a lot of small businesses the opportunity to be in business. That was a big thing. I think I personally raised the awareness about the homeless situation. You know, I'm very thankful to Mayor Mo for bringing the multi-service center. But I know that it was a lot of my advocacy work and my talk about, you know, homelessness in the city and around in the communities. You know, I'm glad that I brought that to the forefront, but I'm thankful for the mayor who really pushed that forward, and the council supported that and everything. So those are some of the things that I will carry with me. I'm very thankful that I was able to serve office and not come out in disgrace, because you see a lot of political figures that get in trouble, and they're hauled off in cuffs, or they're standing on the news. And I just want to say that the two things that the Lord told me as I did my terms, he said two things: you will never go out in disgrace, and your vote will never be for sale. And I held on to that every term. I was afraid every time I ran. I was nervous, I was scared, because I did not want to lose. And the Lord told me that when you think that you're in this office because you did it, you will lose. You keep me first and you honor me, and you see, and my track record has been wonderful. And I'm just very humble and thankful for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Nicholas. That's wonderful. So I want to make sure that I get everyone's accomplishments, and we'll go through this quickly to make sure that you have a chance to talk about other achievements or anything else that you're proud of in the election in your public service. But Mr. Smalls, like you said, were the second African-American male to serve on city council, and you are the longest serving African-American for 17 years. And then talk to us about any other contributions or achievements that you might want to be proud of, or that you might want to mention to us tonight.
Well, there are several things, as I mentioned, about the Negro League baseball field and that recognition, but also some of the things collectively that I participated in, either as council president or as a council member, that has made our city what it is today. And you have to imagine 17 years, some things kind of get lost in gray matter, and you don't remember all of those things. But some of those things, again, that have majorly contributed to our city have been establishing overlay areas in the city. Those overlay areas helped us designate, from a zoning perspective, exactly where to focus dense concentration, whether it's commercial, residential, and those kind of things. And again, I say that because once those zones were created, the city redevelopment really blossomed. And so what we're enjoying today as offerings, I think Councilwoman Nicholas mentioned it, the mayor also, what we're enjoying now, the growth of the city, a good portion of that came from the overlay areas that we, as a council at the time, voted on and put into place. Collective bargaining for the Laurel Police Department, which was a huge milestone. And I had always, from early days as a homeowner association president, been supportive of our Laurel Police Department. National Night Out, in the days when National Night Out involved police officers walking the streets of our communities. My community, under my leadership, we did a number of contributions to the police department, et cetera. The redevelopment of the Laurel Mall site and to the town center that it is now. Once again, these are the things that have contributed majorly to what our city is now and what it will be in the future. And annexations, a number of them that have expanded the city boundaries. And as a result, we've seen the kind of growth in this city from those annexations from a residential, retail, and commercial perspective. So those are just some of the milestones that I am very proud to have been engaged and involved in. I spent 17 years, not just as a city councilman, but also as a member of the City Planning Commission. And as I'm sure many of you know, Laurel is the only municipality out of 27 in Prince George's County that has a planning and zoning. So we should certainly be very proud of that distinction. And I just want to point out a historical fact. The Planning Commission had an African-American chairman, Mr. Don Williford. And Mr. Williford, and if you know anything about the power that the Planning Commission has, set the tone for exactly what I just talked about, the redevelopment and development of our city. And he was a very, very a well-respected chairman for the Planning Commission as well. So just those are the ones that come to mind. I'm sure after this is concluded, I'll think of many more that were probably more important than the ones I mentioned here. But those are definitely some of the milestones that I am proud of.
Mr. Smalls, before we move on, I would like to ask, when you were initially elected to the council, part of the election day coverage of your election and the leader was a comparison to Mr. Parks and his historic election. When you were running, was that on your mind that you would be the second person or the second African-American male to hold office?
To be absolutely honest, no. I just wanted to serve the residents of the city. Being the first this or the second that was not nearly as important. Making history wasn't what I set out to do. If I only served one term and was able to contribute to the betterment of the city, I would have been perfectly satisfied. But to run and have the opportunity to do the kind of things I was able to do, having been elected multiple times, the thought of being in this kind of setting, historic setting, having being the first African-American to serve as long as I have, that none of that was ever anything I had any real desire or thoughts about doing. It was serving the residents of the city as best as I could.
Great, thank you for that. And Abby, thank you for bringing that point up as well. So we do have to kind of move on, but I just wanted to give Ms. Nicholas and Mr. Sydnor another chance again to reiterate their historic milestones. So Ms. Nicholas, like we said, you were the first African-American female to serve and first African-American female president of the city council as well. So did you have any additional contributions or achievements that you wanted to let our audience know about tonight? Oh, and you're on mute now too. There we go.
In closing, I'd just like to say that I'm very pleased with my voting record. I think, while I was in office, we did a lot, that benefited the city. We always kept the residents in mind. And, I'm very proud of that. I don't have any more to add.
Well, thank you for that. And Mr. Sydnor, you had said that you were part, again, of the first majority African-American city council, and now with your historic election as the first African-American male mayor. What else would you have to add to that?
Yeah, some of the things I done when I was a council member, I did the first job fair the City of Laurel ever had as a councilor in 2018. I did the first expungement program the City of Laurel ever had. All our recreation centers you see outside, our adult fitness station, we have one in Spicer Park, we have one in Cypress Street, we have one in Laurel Lakes. I brought those outdoor fitness stations to the city because I believe in health and fitness as well. Other things that I did, I made June 10th an official city holiday before the federal government made it a holiday. During the COVID, people was hurting, need money, need to pay for their food and rent, things of that nature. So before the American Rescue money came in, we took money from our unreserved funds, our legislation, we get money from that to help people feed themselves and pay their rent during a pandemic. There's a lot of other things I can go on about. I don't like bragging about what I've done, but you know, it's just I'm just here to serve, and so since you asked this question, I'll just leave it right there. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for that, Mr. Mayor, and thank you as well, Mr. Smalls and Ms. Nicholas, you know, for your service, and certainly this is the forum to toot your own horn, and we want to showcase and document that not only tonight in the webinar, but with our exhibit, and then also for the future, because you know, one lesson that we learned during the pandemic is to do a better job of documenting history as it happens, and so that's why we wanted to you know, to document the historic milestone in the 2023 election, and then look backwards into the archives and into living memory to document, you know, how Laurel has changed and progressed over the last 100 or so years. And so we do have a couple questions, and now we're going to kind of move into kind of more of the overall experience, and then looking at advice and kind of the status of elections in Laurel. So as we were doing our research, and I mentioned the help we received from the city and members like Rick Wilson, they did a lot of number crunching, and unfortunately what we have found out is that even over the past couple of decades, going back 30 or so years into Laurel's history, there's been a decrease in voter turnout, and that's one of the things that we will be showcasing in our exhibits, is that in the very early years of Laurel, when, focusing on the beginning of this exhibit in the 1920s, almost everyone who lived in Laurel at the time voted. We had over 90% voter turnout, and then that decreased to 69% in the mid-century, in the 60s and 70s, and then the latest election was only 13% of registered voters turning out for this. And so I guess I wanted to hear from your perspective how you would characterize the voting experience in Laurel, and certainly Mr. Smalls, going back to you, you know, you have about almost 20 years now since you were first elected. You know, have you seen changes? How would you characterize the voting experience, the engagement, the education of Laurel voters in general, especially from when you first started to the end of your term, and even now on the appeals?
It's been a constantly evolving process. When I first ran, for example, the city had only one polling location, that was at the Phelps Center. Through encouragement from city residents, from the City Board of Elections, from the mayor and city council, that was expanded to two voting locations, which we currently enjoy. But also with the progression of early voting, voting by mail, and a number of other initiatives to try to expand and get more people to turn out. Before I got off the council, one of the things that then Councilman Sydnor introduced, and hopefully I'm not stealing his thunder, but that was to have the voting age lowered, and I'm sure that's something he'll talk about. But I supported that. Getting, for example, going into high schools, getting our young people engaged in the election process, registering or pre-registering, for example, high school students, while they may not be able to vote until they're 18, they're pre-registered at maybe 16, 17 years old. So when they do become get to voting age, they're already registered to vote. They've already had some education on what the election process is, and hopefully having other kinds of activities throughout the year. And again, Mayor Sydnor talked a little bit about some of the things that he brought to the city with a focus on young people, but getting them excited about the city and what the city has to offer, and educating them is a big way, I think, to begin increasing the number of people who turn out to vote. One of the other things that I'm pretty optimistic about is the growth in the city. So because of the annexations that I've mentioned earlier, because of the development in the city has a much more diverse population, a much, I think, more educated population in the city. People who, and you can tell that just by the election we just had, by the number of candidates who ran for election. That was a historic election that we had, not just from the perspective of electing Mayor Sydnor, but the number of candidates who actually had an interest, have an interest in the city. We shouldn't lose that momentum. We should find ways to engage those folks, or some of those folks who participated in running, to continue encouraging people to turn out to vote. So I'm optimistic that, well, the goal should be 90% or higher.
Right.
And hopefully at some point in the very near future, maybe when Mayor Sydnor runs for re-election in 4 years, that there'll be that kind of energy generated so that our numbers will increase.
Thank you for that, Mr. Smalls. Yeah, I appreciate the enthusiasm and encouragement as well. Ms. Nicholas, I'm going to ask you for your thoughts on how you would characterize the voting experience in Laurel, following what Mr. Smalls had said, but also in your campaigning and dealing with the people of Laurel. How would you kind of characterize the overall civic engagement in Laurel?
Okay. I think it had its highs and its lows. I think there was a higher voter turnout when it was a mayor's race, number one. Number two, when I would door knock and when I would talk to people, some people say, oh, I don't vote in city elections. And I would really say why and challenge them, give them pushback as to why. And, I would use myself as an example. I said, every vote counts. I said, look at me, as the first African-American, a female, people had to have come out to vote for me. Your vote counts and it's very important. And I would find that would be a conversation that I would have repeatedly with people. I'm hoping that the voting numbers will increase. I'm just, I continue to encourage people, particularly the young people and things, to vote.
Absolutely, and we'll circle back to that in just a minute, but I wanted to ask Mr. Mayor if you had any, again, thoughts on the voting experience in Laurel, and if perhaps it was different in your experience in campaigning and working with the residents of Laurel for a mayoral election versus your elections for city council.
Now, I find my voting experience from Laurel very pleasant. The voters are very smart. You knock on people's door, they know what they're talking about. They challenge you. They have you think about your platform to meet the needs of the citizens. I didn't have too much opposition from people in the community. It's just, like I said, folks are very intelligent. They know what they want. They know what kind of candidate they want. They know the type of business they want in the city. They want to save the environment. They want to grow the community. So you got to balance all that type of stuff. So overall, like I said, I'm going to use the word, my vote experience in campaigning for the council and the mayor was very pleasant. And I enjoyed it. I'm good at knocking on doors. I'm good at talking to people in small groups because, I'm very personal and I can listen to folks what they want to say. And I'm very authentic with them. And it's a man of integrity. So it's just, overall, it was great.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. Especially, from your recent campaigns and going back the past couple of decades, that there is this optimism that, even with lower turnout, that it's just a matter of education or making those personal connections. And certainly we'll be trying to do our part as well with the exhibit and educating people on how to register to vote or what ward they live in, or how to do mail-in ballots and all those things. So we're hoping to continue the path that you have set out as well. So we have one final question, and this is more of your advice. So this is more of an opinion, but I do want to encourage our audience as we wrap up our evening tonight to put any questions or comments that you have in the chat. We've seen a couple come through already, so please feel free just to add any comments in the chat as well. So for our panelists tonight, any closing thoughts, but in particular, what advice would you give to voters, specifically in Laurel, because that's where we are and we're focused on tonight, but just voters in general, anyone who might be happening to watch this webinar that's not in Laurel, but especially the younger generation, what advice would you have on getting people engaged, educated, and connected? And Mr. Smalls, we'll go back in order. We'll start with you again, please.
Just kind of dovetailing on the previous question, in terms of voter turnout, when it seems that when things are going well, people don't feel a need to actually come out and vote for change. During controversial times, you will probably, and if you looked at your data, you might find that if there were controversial issues on the ballot or things that people felt strongly about with city government, you may see higher voter turnout to change the administration and that sort of thing. In terms of advice, I would certainly advise the council, members of the council. The mayor already knows this and has experienced this, but get out from home. In other words, don't just sit in council chambers. I learned a great deal when I was involved with Prince George's County government, when I was involved with the Maryland Municipal League, when I was involved with National League of Cities, and a host of other organizations, groups, and the people that you meet. There is little that is brand new that you can bring back to your city, but learn as much as you can. Engage with people outside of the city limits to bring things back into the city. So in terms of advice, that's advice I certainly would offer to our newly elected and first time elected council members. Don't just attend council meetings, get engaged, be involved in the community and outside of the community, and bring what you learn back into the city. That would be my
Thank you for that,
advice.
Mr. Small. That's very inspiring. Ms. Nicholas, we'll turn it over to you. Any advice for voters or anyone thinking about getting started in public service?
Well, what I would say, number one, is to stay aware. I would encourage people, young and middle age or older, to volunteer, learn your community, know your community, get the facts, attend council meetings. When I was on the council, I was very visible. I went to yard sales. I, stopped at all the grocery stores. I went to churches. I went to a lot of events. That's how I got to know people. And in talking and having those conversations, you learn about what their values are, what their concerns are, what their needs are. So I would say to a person that's aspiring to run for office is get involved in your community, stay teachable, be a great listener, and get the facts. Thank you.
Yes, excellent. That's good advice, really, for any situation, is just to learn and be informed and get involved. But Mr. Mayor, we will end our questions with you and for your advice.
Yeah, I'm always talking to young people, and I substitute in the public school system, and we talk about voting all the time. History, right? I study history. Great as our country is, it always wasn't this way at first. And then you look at our history in current states, in southern states, they're trying to take history from school, trying to rewrite history. And I think that's very important that we need to vote. That's one of the reasons why I tell them vote. Once you study history, understand our country, you understand the trends that's going on in the world, you understand where you live at, and the system that you live in, things have changed. The only thing that can change is get people who represent you, who have passion, and feel very passionate about things in their community. So I always say, learn your history, stand on integrity. If you're gonna run for any type of political office, be yourself. Study the craft you want to study. Study the trends in the community. Because everybody has something they favor about. Like right now in our community, we have a very compassionate community about saving the environment. We have a very compassionate community about growing economically as well. So you gotta have that balanced approach. You know, you can't get too high or too low. You gotta meet people where they at though. But the original question you asked, how would I talk to young people? History is very important. If you don't study history, it repeat itself. And you can see it happening in our country today. Unfortunately, things are changing that's trying to take us back. Because we know in 1965, got the Voting Rights Bill signed. In 2013, the Voting Rights Bill was gutted. You know, they said the southern states said they don't need that protection anymore. You take that pre-clearance away, then they start suppressing the votes in those southern states. So, but that's a constant thing that's going on. We just got to stay aware and just continue to learn and continue to grow together. So, thank you.
All right, thank you for that, Mr. Mayor, and thank you again for bringing it back around to history, which is what we love talking about. So just another quick mention that this event, our panel tonight, is in support of our temporary exhibit, Visions and Voices, the African-American Voting Experience in Laurel, 1920 to 2023. And as part of that exhibit, you'll get to see some of these historic milestones, but it'll also be framed in the context of what was going on in our state and nationally at the time, including some of the voter acts and registration acts that Mr. Mayor just mentioned. So there'll be, you know, a more historical context in that broader sense in our exhibits as well. So I just, again, wanted to thank everyone for coming out tonight and for our panelists for having their time to support our exhibit, to support what we do at the Historical Society, and with your words of wisdom tonight. And just to say that this again was in celebration of Black History Month today in February, but that these accomplishments should be, you know, honored and discussed and documented always. And so this is going to be part of the story going forward, not just by the recording of this webinar, but by your inspiration for the next generation of council members in the service to Laurel, that hopefully you'll be inspired to do from the webinar tonight. So I know we have a couple questions that have come through. I'm gonna toss it over to Abby to look through some of the questions, and I am gonna actually share my screen just very quickly, as Abby put into the chat that Ms. Nicholas also runs a nonprofit. So I'm just going to share that link. It's in the chat, but I'm just going to put that up on the screen just real quick so everyone can see it. It's loveisnotenough.org. And so this is a little more backgrounds, some of which you heard tonight about Valerie Nicholas, but also focusing on the work that she does with her nonprofit. And so there's ways to get involved, to join, and then give you a little bit more about her background as well, including some of her new accomplishments with her education. So we congratulate her on her work with her nonprofit as well.
So looking at questions, we have kind of touched on a lot of these answers already. Karen Lubinecki had pointed out some of the voter turnout, including the fact that, you know, this past race, the voter turnout was only 13%, even though it was a hotly contested mayoral race. And we've kind of already discussed the fact that we're seeing that kind of downward shift, and what can we do to kind of improve that voter turnout. But if any of our panelists have any more comments that they would like to make about that, feel free to jump in. If not, we also had a question from Melissa that's a more targeted question based on kind of like our last question that you all just answered. And it's, how would you go about inspiring youth in Laurel to share your passion for service to our community?
I'd like to say that visiting schools, visiting the high schools, even visiting the elementary schools, but going out and talking to people in the community centers and high schools, going to various activities, basketball games, and becoming engaged, because you have to meet people where they are. And I think just education is the key to know learning. And I just think that maybe getting involved with the school system, just spreading the word of the importance of voting, the importance of just knowing what's going on in your community could start the conversation.
Thank you for that. I do think that's a
If I could-
great point.
If I could jump in, I agree with Ms. Nicholas. But to just kind of broaden that a little bit, the young people particularly need to be engaged. You know, an adult standing in front of a group of kids lecturing them about the importance of voting, I don't think strikes home as deeply as them being engaged with hands-on kinds of things, like standing in front of Harris Teeter and assisting with voter registration, participating in any other kind of activities as young people that would draw people to have a better understanding of the election process, a particular candidate, whatever the case may be, but engaging them. I always, when I was running and as a council member once elected, engaged just my grandkids and kids in door knocking, in dropping flyers, in attending meetings or watching meetings, just so they could understand and be a part of the experience. And I think that's what brings them out more and more, is the experience, not the lecture, the experience. They've had their hands on and participated in a variety of different things that are focused on voter turnout and elections.
Mr. Smalls, I think you share a lot of similar opinions with current Councilwoman Kyla Clark, who I know Anne and myself have spoken with a little bit about getting people more involved with registering to vote. And I just wanted to give her a little bit of a shout out. I think she may still be in the webinar because she's been helping us a little bit with this exhibit as well in terms of voter registration. There also are a lot of really wonderful comments and thank yous for all of you for participating as panelists in the webinar. So if you all haven't had a chance to read them yet, I encourage you to do that. Thank you to all of our webinar attendees for leaving all of those. But that concludes all the questions that were left.
All right, thank you, Abby. Yeah, so I think we will end it here. So what I will do is I'll just stop the recording and give everyone just a few more minutes to wrap up and put any final questions or comments in the chat. But I will stop the recording now and just say thank you again for attending and participate and learn and get engaged, whether you're joining us from Laurel or wherever you're viewing this webinar. So thank you again.
Thank you.